Welcome to Transform, Ignite, Disrupt, bringing you interviews and insights covering proven practical strategies to unlock your company's innovation potential. Here's your host, Stephen L. Blue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. And I'm just thrilled to be back in the saddle again. It's been a couple of weeks that I've had off, and I was getting kind of bored, to tell you the truth. And I missed our time together, and I missed Transform, Ignite, and Disrupt. So welcome back to another episode of how to transform your world, ignite your innovation, and then disrupt the entire market. I love it. This is just great stuff, and I'm really thrilled to reintroduce my audience today to a League of Extraordinary CEOs interview I did a while back. And I love this. This is a company called Feetz, F-E-E-T-Z. And you can find them on Feetz.com. And I interviewed Lucy Beard, the founder and CEO of Feetz. And this company and this CEO has everything that I like. It's got innovation. It's got sustainability. It's got originality. It's got customization. It's got saving the planet. I'm telling you, I just love this stuff, and I love this company. And I think you will too. You're going to find a lot of lessons in this episode of Transform, Ignite, and Disrupt. And if you listen carefully to how Lucy came upon the idea and how what I didn't know, and you'll learn this in the interview, is that the average pair of shoe takes some ungodly amount of water to make it. It's just it's like just thousands and thousands of gallons of water are wasted just to make one shoe. And Lucy was able to cut that back into practically nothing. And of course, if you ever had trouble finding a shoe that fits, they're always too big, they're always too small, they're always too wide, they're always too something. This customization part of her innovation is just, it's like you use your iPhone and instant voila, perfect shoe for you. And so I think you're going to find a lot of great lessons here. I was thrilled to be able to interview her, and I'm just happier and all get out to be able to have this on one of my podcasts. So enjoy it and let me know what you think of it.
Hello. Hi, Steve. This is Lucy.
Lucy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. I got to tell you, I was looking over your bio this morning, and I wanted to take a nap.
You did? How come?
Oh, my God. Two Ironmans and 10 triathlons, a fabulous business, breakthrough technology, customization, sustainability, market disruption. Holy moly.
I know. Well, I was just looking. You wrote a book on American manufacturing. I was like, wow, here you go. You kind of see why the world needs to change.
Oh, yeah. And as I look at what you've done, it's like it's everything that American manufacturing has to do. In fact, I just published a book with Jack Canfield, and I did a chapter in it on innovation, what I call innovational potential, and how companies, particularly Rust Belt companies, need to change their whole business models and how they go to market, but more importantly, how they tackle technology, which most of them don't. And what you've done is just a role model for any company, but honestly, especially manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how we make stuff. You don't really get into that until you can suddenly realize, and I know we'll get right into it, you're recording, I'm like, it was really just a problem of I couldn't find shoes that fit. And then as I found out how shoes were made, I was like, hold on, this is arcane. Surely we've got to change this. But I never came from a world of understanding how things were made. So I didn't have the concept.
An actuarial, right? Mathematician, isn't that your background?
I'm a mathematician.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you're smarter than me. We know that already.
No, I just used to love numbers and loved predicting who was going to live and die. And then I realized I wasn't a traditional actuary because, if you've ever met them in a room, most of them don't talk to each other. They just stare at the wall. And I was like, I'm predicting who's going to live or die. I kind of want to actually meet these people who I'm doing all these evaluations on. And so my mentor told me, he said, I don't think you're a normal actuary. And I moved out of that world and into kind of traditional data science and customer experience and Silicon Valley, and getting to see that in those days when Facebook and Google were just starting and seeing you really can't change the world if you just come at it from a different angle. And it sparked my little interest of entrepreneurship.
Well, and that's now, as you know, I'm not a journalist. I'm a CEO, just like you are. I'm running a company, and I do this League of Extraordinary CEOs on the side. But that's sort of a good entree to what I try to achieve in these things, and I get a lot of press on this. The ACBJ has about 3.6 million readers, but of course that's not all 3.6 million that read my column, but about 70,000 of them every time I publish one do. And what I try to do, Lucy, is I try to come at these things not like a journalist would. So I'll have different questions than the journalist would. And I know you've done a lot of these interviews. I want to get into your head in terms of, I want to do two things. One is I want to promote your brand and give you a lot of really free, credible publicity. And secondly, I want to bring a new dimension of thinking to my readers who kind of turn to my column to find out, how does this person think that's different than me, and what can I learn from them?
That's good. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff around the business, right? But I always find it fascinating to learn about what is the person and how do they actually tick? What was the decisions that they made to learn from? So that's why I love this opportunity to be able to share a little bit of my story. And I was reading tons of stories about the people that you had, the woman running the hair loss company and other things. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
All these little insights.
Yeah. Yeah, she's, if you're referring to this woman, I can't remember her name now, she had the mills up in northern Minnesota. She'd never done anything like that before. It was a woolen mill business that she stumbled upon. She was somewhat like you because she had never done anything even close to it. They actually had to translate all of the operating manuals from Japanese into English.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like, a lot of people think that's, Lucy stumbled into this thing, did a couple of things, boom, there it is, and the same thing with Stephanie was her name up in Northern Woolen Mills. Everyone thinks that what she did was easy, but the enormous roadblocks to get what you've done and what she has done is essential. But what I try to say to my readers, and as you know, I've done interviews as big as Bill McDermott, the CEO of SAP, and as famous as Mike Lindell, the inventor of My Pillow. So I get sort of I know he's a pretty interesting guy too. He told me that he's afraid of men in suits. He said some guys are afraid of clowns. I'm afraid of men in suits because they're always trying to screw me.
Yeah, 4 years in, I'm like, I might agree with that statement a little bit, but that's life. If you don't take a risk, then you're never going to get any reward.
That's true. So, okay, so let's start off with you had 2 Starbucks coffees after you were disappointed and frustrated that the shoes wouldn't fit, and so there was a spark moment there, right?
Yeah.
How did
the story started a little bit. Yeah, the story actually started a little bit before it from a prospect of a CEO. Like, if you're going to start a business, you have to be in the mindset of, I'm looking and I'm open and I'm looking for the problems of the world. And so I was in that mindset versus it truly was like, oh my God, I'm running my life. I'm doing this. I'm running a job and doing all this. So, I'd actually taken a year off and I'd bought an RV and I went traveling in the RV and I just drove around the country, just experiencing new things, no technology. And I went to Alaska. And in Alaska, like, you just see the awesome nature of beauty of things like the glaciers and bears and rivers and gold mines. And you see what has changed in as little as 20 or 200 years compared to the 20,000 years before that. And so I was already had this like moment of realization of this world is a finite place. And if I am part of it, I want to leave the world a better place when I leave it than when I joined it, because it's kind of my social responsibility as a human being. After that, I was just open. So my mindset was in a different place than the busy world we live in. And that's critical if you want to be successful as a business owner, because you kind of have to be open to things that you never would have before. And that's therefore when the, trying on the shoes and the coffee moment happened, I was already in a mental space of saying, like, I want to do something different. I'm just kind of waiting for when that like lightning strike actually happens. And that was the day that happened.
Was that the first lightning strike or the 5th or?
There had been like a couple of little ones beforehand. I like geocaching, and so this is hard. So could I make it easier to do it this way? I'm driving, and wow, I wish my navigation did this versus this. And so I was always like asking myself, is this a problem I want to solve? Does this actually make sense? And it was just the shoe thing was there. I am interested in new technology. So having that coffee, I watched the machines, and I opened a magazine and saw a picture of a 3D printer, and it said, this is how manufacturing will change with mass customization. And so it really was a trifecta of, I had this personal problem. I saw a system like with Starbucks. Well, we're already doing that with hardware. Software's been doing it for years, but hardware can happen if you like organize it correctly. And here is a tool that could actually be the answer to how I want to do it. Now, would I have become and started a business if some other things didn't happen? The next thing that happened is I said, well, I'm bored. I don't have anything to do right now because I'd kind of winded up the trip on the RV, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? Go get a corporate job. I saw this thing in my email box that said, go and do a 24-hour weekend of a startup weekend. And I said, well, I don't know what to do. And it was fashion and technology. So here I am, like with this idea that it just happened to me. And I was like, well, I'm kind of have nothing to do. Like I'll go and just like talk to people and interact with people, like get back into the real world. And there is where I actually spent it was 48 hours, 48 hours where everybody said 3D printing and shoes and customization and making this. And I'm like, wow, this sounds amazing. And I had amazing people work around me for 48 hours talking about, well, what would the business be and how would it be and who would it be? And at the end of the 48 hours, we pitched, and someone came up to me and said, do you want to make this a real business? And I said, no, not really. I want to go back to work and stuff. And they said, well, I mean, you don't have to do much. We just do a 4-month training program where we teach you about how to set up a business, and you do it at night. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And it's called the Founders Institute. So it's a formal training program for founders in that early stage saying, like, do you want to make it into a business? And I said, all right, I'll do it. And it wasn't really until like 3 months into that program, or really maybe 3 weeks into the program, where I was like, actually, this is something that really does interest me. I've always wanted to be kind of an entrepreneur or do something because of that Alaska moment and other things in life. And then we had one article after 3 months from CNBC, and that's where it became okay, if I am in, and I will do everything and anything to make this happen. I will not have a salary for 3 years. I will move across the country to do anything I can. I will meet every single customer. I will take every single phone call from anyone that wants to try and move this thing forward. So it never really happens, Steve, and I'm sure you hear that from others, of like, there's suddenly, oh yes, and then tomorrow, the next day, here we go, everything is there. It evolves over time of all these things that just kind of align.
Never works like that. And this is key for anyone who would read this, is that the statements you just made about no matter what, I'm going to make it happen. No matter what, I'm going to make it happen. And that's easy to say in the beginning until the no matter what's come your way. How'd you deal with that?
Right. And so that was like 4 months in. So it was September, about 4 years ago today, where I sat down and had that coffee moment. I started that little program in the November timeframe and graduated in March. The February, I said, okay, they push you every week in this program. And 1 week it said, go make customers and go get marketing. And I'm like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing yet. I just know that there's kind of this problem and I'm evolving it. And I applied to be at a 3D printing conference in New York. And I went there and had like just prototypes of things that I could print with, no money and no experience and not knowing how to do it. And that's where I met people who came up and said, like, you've got to do this, and this big article. And that is where that mental moment, I remember leaving that conference saying, like, I am all in. If I'm going for this, you can't do it half. This industry is going so fast. So much is happening. Let's do it. And then I became a lot more serious about like writing the business plan, trying to get customers, setting up a website, going out and trying to do the fundraising thing that you have to do as a small business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You say the industry is moving fast. You meant the 3D industry, not the shoe industry, I presume.
Yes. In terms of this new technology, at that point, like 3D printing was enormously hot. Nike had announced 3D printed shoes. Adidas had as well. All of them were in the mode of talking about it. And here was some little upstart saying like, well, we have no experience, no knowledge, no background, and no money, but we're going to do it differently. And to some extent, that's obnoxious, but to other extent, I said earlier, like, well, what have I got to lose? And if you don't take a risk, there's no reward. And that really was, for me as an individual and as a woman, something that took years for me to be okay with. Because I kind of had been surrounded in Silicon Valley of here's Facebook and here's Google and here's all these other wonderful, successful little companies. And you don't always know the story behind them, but you're like, well, why can't I do it? And I always felt scared. I always felt that I wouldn't be good enough to do it. And it got to that point, like later in my life, 7 years later, where I said, pardon the French, but it's like, it's fuck it. I mean, like, if I redefine failure by saying, if I don't try, that is failure.
Yep, that's right.
And by letting myself say that out loud, then I was like, okay. And that was part of the, I'm all in. And, and I'm like, of course I made mistakes. Like or mistakes or just like things that you learn along the way. Oh, that picture could have been better. I could have written it that way. I could have followed it with that person differently. I could have done a price point or done a business model. Like, but you only learn by actually getting out there and doing it.
Yeah. You got to fail fast.
Fail fast, right? And that is what the training of Silicon Valley, and I worked at a really high growth company called Zynga, which made Facebook games. They're still around. I was in one of their massive upswings where they doubled employees in 3 months, from 1,000 to 2,000 people. So like enormous chaos and scale all going on at the same time. And you learn how to do the impossible in literally 24 hours. So I learned how to be nimble, prioritize quickly, work with speed, and actually achieve things and get over the finish line on things. So that training was really helpful for me in a startup that, compared to peers who were also trying to do startups, they kind of were very methodical and slow. And so weeks would go by and it would be like, well, have you learned anything or done anything? And I'm like, no, it's okay. Versus I had got an article, got 20 customers, put up a website, all in the space of just weeks. And now, you've looked at us for 4 years in and we're like, wow, we have sold more shoes than the big four combined in this industry. We are pretty much the largest custom shoe manufacturer in the world. We are in the process of winning contracts for government and other things that, that are out there in the world in the space of just 4 years from a person sitting down having that cup of coffee.
That's unbelievable. Well, it's kind of fun. It's extraordinary.
Exactly. And we are always learning.
What you said was really important, though, for particularly a lot of the CEOs who read my column. They tend to be middle market, older line companies that got policies and procedures and all that kind of stuff, and they're everything that a startup is not. Although there really isn't any reason why they can't act more like a startup in some respects. But you laid on some key points. You have to be nimble. You have to be quick. You have to be able to do things in a hurry. You have to be comfortable with failure.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll happen. And
if
you don't fail, you can't win at anything.
And you can do that in a big company or a middle company. I mean, that's how I started. I was at a large company called Intuit that makes TurboTax and QuickBooks and QuickHand. And they'd got to that stage where they were a little bit like, we're getting stagnant. We've got 7,000 employees and we're doing our good, single digit growth every year, but like we're going to get taken over if we don't really kind of innovate. And here I was 25 years old, and I come in and I'm like, well, there's this thing called Twitter. Like, why don't we offer help on taxes on Twitter? And they're like, you can't do that. They're like FTC regulations and all things like this. And I was like, well, sure, like there's things, but like, can you just have it? And there's, I would pester enough people where they'd say, okay, Lucy, shut up. You still have your normal job. But you can then assemble 3 or 4 people, work with customer service, and go out there in the world. And so TurboTax Lucy became real, and I would help people and say, like, I would search for things and help them out and push them onto the channel that they needed. And that became successful, right? So then you could do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And that was in a massive company. And so you can do it. It's just your mindset of saying, I'm okay to change it and I'm okay to take that risk.
Yeah, and that's the it is a risk too, because if you're not careful, you're threatening the people who don't want to see anything different, and then the next thing you know, all the villagers are on the way up the hill to kill Frankenstein.
Yeah, and it's happened many times, both at my present company and in corporate. Sometimes you will have those villagers take you down, and you will have to change and become a phoenix and become something else. Or sometimes you win, and the villagers actually come on your side.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been in a startup before, but I have been in a turnaround, and so I understand the urgency to get things done quickly and move fast and take risks. And in a turnaround, it's not like how it is. Big companies, Intuit, any of them to that size or bigger, they're playing like Monopoly. It's not like real money like it is to you in your business. I mean, you're playing with real cash, your cash. And the turnaround the same way. I mean, some days we'd have to decide between keeping the lights on or making payroll.
Yeah, that's hard. That's very, very hard.
So let's go back to back to this 48-hour program. Was that a structured program, or did you? I wasn't quite clear on that, or was that you got a bunch of Silicon Valley people together to talk this idea through?
There's a bunch of them that exist in the world. This one's called Startup Weekend. So it is a formal program that exists and has expanded over its time to around the world. And this was in San Diego, so not in Silicon Valley, although I think they formulated up there. And it was volunteers that said, hey, can we have your label of Startup Weekend? We're passionate about fashion. This wonderful woman who had just had crazy hair and wore great clothing, and you could just tell. You'd look at her and you're like, you must be in fashion. And she said, I'm just going to organize people, and I'm going to put it on Meetup group, and I'm just going to send emails out, and whoever shows up, shows up. And I'm going to organize mentors, people who have done startups before, like all volunteer. It doesn't cost anything. And you go into a little corporate building for 48 hours that's been donated, and you just work. And they help you structure, right, to say, like, well, what's the problem? And how would you do that? And can you build a quick prototype that you can actually show somebody? And we're like, so I was calling people on Saturday afternoon saying, what's a 3D printer? Like, I've heard of this thing, but I've never seen one. Like, can I find one and print a design? And they're like, well, it's a 3D design. I'm like, well, how do I find a 3D designer? Like, and can they make it in an hour? Of course, that's ludicrous now, but when you're there and you're in the adrenaline and you're there, like you find a way to move the mountain. And although we didn't get the 3D printer done at that time, I did actually find a group called Fab Lab, or a working space that had 3D printers. And they remember me calling them up and hounding them and saying, like, I found you on the internet. They were pretty closed and private because they were also a group of networking and organizations. And I eventually turned them and say, like, can I be an entrepreneur in residence, like, with you? And they're like, we don't even know what that really means. And I'm like, well, I know a lot of business, and I know a lot of how to do plans and programs and communicate and talk to people, but I don't know any of this, like, technology. So could you teach me that? And I'll teach you that. And, like, here we go. And that's what it became, as a relationship. So I was going through this Founders Institute program and also being an entrepreneur in residence in this, makerspace where I could look at a 3D printer and, break it every day, but then learn how to fix it and what the technologies are. And they're like, well, what are materials? Like, I don't know. I'm not a chemist. They're like, well, go buy shoes. So I'd go to Goodwill. I'd buy shoes and rip them apart. I'd take a blowtorch. I'd melt them and then say, like, can anyone give me a kit that I can buy for $5 in the Science Museum to try and determine, like, is this a rubber or a plastic or a what?
Yeah.
Because I was there and I said, well, you should open up on Saturdays and just allow anyone that wants to come in to come in. I would stand there and I'd have a whiteboard and I'd write a question. I'd go, 3D printed shoes, what do you think? Or I'd go, what are the materials? And every week I would ask something and people would just come up to me and half of them would say I'm crazy and half of them would say, like, you're wrong. And the other half would go, like, they would find something to tell me why I was not doing it right. But I would ask them so many questions about, like, well, why? Well, why? Okay, why couldn't you do it? Well, what does that mean? Well, what is that material? Well, so you can't invent a material? You have to buy it? Where do you buy it? And I would just pester them with so many questions that I would walk away with more knowledge than them coming in and telling me why I would never succeed. But I was open to that, right? Because I didn't know anything. So I said, well, what have I got to lose here? All I'm walking away with is a Saturday that I spent with the public asking a bunch of questions. because there was no money. We didn't have any money for 18 months from this idea.
18 months. Wow. So that becomes the platform. My next question is, well, actually, two-part. How do you survive financially, and how do you build a team? When you have no money for 18 months.
Yeah. First one is I at least had spent 15 years in corporate life that, I'm not rich, but there's enough there that I could say I have a couple of assets. So I bought an RV. So I said, okay, I own this RV. I'm going to live in it. So instead of living in a house, I'm going to rent the house out so that I can still have that. And I'm going to have this RV and go live on the beach. And I'm not going to buy new clothing and food I don't really need. And I'll just eat like the cheapest pot ramen I can. And you find that you can actually live very, very cheaply. And I'd do a little couple gigs and help people out for like $100 here or $200 there. Nothing like I was earning a real wage. That it kind of works. Then I would, for the other side, so team. So I was in this fab lab, this maker space, and I used it more as a resource to learn versus they were a team. And then a lot of people there would come between jobs because they're like, well, I don't really have something to do. I'll hang out here while I work out what I'm doing next. So I would be able to borrow them for a week or two. And I would get as much information and get as much further. They weren't a employee of a company because there was like no company. It was just this idea forming, but I was determined to get there. And each one would help me with introducing me to somebody else until I finally applied for a formal business accelerator program that teaches you how to turn it into a business, incorporates you, gets you all there. And I had to have an engineer. I had to have another team member on. So I looked around and I said, well, who can I have? And my husband is an engineer, and he had taken this time off with me to go on this travel trip. And I said, look, honey, you're an engineer. I need somebody who is cheap, who can pick up a 3D printer because it's 50 pounds, right? And I'm having to constantly move it around all the time. And that I can write their name down on this application form as an engineer. I said, are you willing to do it? And he's like, no. And I said, well, you don't have a choice because, this is a husband and wife thing. I'm like, you don't have a choice. So I'm writing your name down on it. And so he became the official first employee of the company. Friends and family, they say like it happens often. I'm like, it really does. And now we're 4 years in, he is the CTO of the company, and he's absolutely brilliant at this job. His background is science and technology and building new machines that don't exist yet. So he's built things for the FBI. They're all top secret. He's built stuff that NASA used to go to Mars. So when it comes to 3D printing, and he's a chemical scientist by nature, so I'm like, he was actually the perfect fit for this. I just didn't really realize that. It started off, I just need somebody. And when you start a company and a team, you're going to go through so many hurdles that it's always the hardest thing to try and find your co-founder. Like, who is going to be on my side while we go through the ups and the downs? And a lot of companies fail because, like, when those hard times hit, you fight, you argue, you blame. And when it is a husband and wife that's been together for 22 years, we've already gone through those phases in our life. So when it comes to this, of course we argue, of course we have different strategies, and of course we have different ways to do it, but we already have been through it enough to know that we have each other's back. And so some of those problems that happen in a normal business, because you're new as business partners, didn't have to happen for us. It allowed us to be stronger and allowed us to therefore move faster because we knew each other's strengths and knew each other's weaknesses and knew what we could be able to do and therefore get it done faster.
That's an interesting angle, Lucy, because some people would have said, don't do that with a spouse. That's the worst arrangement you can possibly have.
Every relationship is different, right? And some people, it's the brother-sister relationship. Some people, it's two best friends that grew up, thick and thin since the age of 5. My husband and I met when I was 16 and he was 18, and we moved out straight away, like after 2 months of knowing each other. So we are that tight. We grew up together, like learning what life really was about. And therefore we were knowing that. And hey, it's not perfect. Like, of course we fought and we found like, oh my God, you're that person at work? I hated that person at work. We're like, oh God, you're the person that like all you do is like bark orders. Or no, you're the person that like doesn't do anything and has to be chased to do it. I'm like, oh. but we also use it as an opportunity of like, wow, we get this opportunity to spend time with each other. We love each other. We get to, if we're successful and like we keep going forward, we're going to actually be able to say we did it together. And we get to experience this thing, and life is just a sense of experiences that we pull together. That is a really great thing that is fortunate that most people don't get to have.
Yeah.
But I also agree with you, Steve. It's not right for everybody. You have to assess your own personal situation.
Yeah.
On the flip side, remember I was on this little RV trip. One of the other things that I had read in a magazine was they are looking for people to go to Mars. And they want to send people in a rocket to go to Mars, do a slingshot, and come back. And it was like you were going to have to be stuck with one person in a little tiny tube for 5 years because they want to know, can people survive or not? And that was one of the things I was saying to my husband. I was like, hey, do you want to like sit in a tube with me? We're going to go on an adventure for 5 years. So if you're someone that would willing to consider that, then maybe starting a startup with your other person is appropriate because it is kind of like that. If you wouldn't do that, then don't do the founder thing with them.
Yeah. Well, I know exactly how I feel. My wife's, we've been married 31 years. She's also my best friend, and I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. It's challenges, you guys know. Yeah.
I just want to loop back for just a minute on my note here was mind-bending. You did the RV trip. Well, you know, you look at your background and you look at your education as an actuary and as a mathematician. It's not exactly a creative, think out of the box education and immersion, if you will. And so you did this RV trip, and I heard what you said about being open to new ideas, experiences, and all kind of stuff, and that's key. But it had to be something more than the RV trip that bended your mind to the point where you could come upon an idea like this. And of course, this wouldn't be the only one, or maybe it was the first one, but you're the type of person who would have dozens and dozens of these kind of ideas. I'm trying to get at that a little bit more. How's that work?
Why this idea?
No, beyond the RV trip, the idea of that you said of being open to new experiences and being able to see the world through a different lens. That's the golden nugget for CEOs, who, especially ones who are stuck in a rut and have been doing the same thing forever. What else would you suggest, or did you do that CEOs that read this column can say, "Oh yeah, I need to go on an RV trip, or I need to go to the Founders Weekend, or whatever. Here's what I need to do to get my mind out of the Rust Belt rut."
So I was working into it for 7 years, corporate company, sitting in there. Going up the corporate ladder. But surrounding me was like Google was actually buying up their campus right next to Intuit. So every day you would walk outside of this great company, one of the best companies to work at, right? Voted that way, amazing, but not like the new thing. And outside I would see these octobikes happen of like Google, right? And you'd see these bright colors and you suddenly see people walking around in like flamingo costumes. So I'd walk out of the doors of where I worked and I'd see this other world. I'd be like, I want to be part of that other world. And I didn't know what that meant and I didn't know how to do it. But I was like, well, what do you do? And people would say, oh yeah, like there's these things called meetup groups. Just go at night and go to them, go watch pitch events. And I'm like, okay, so I would go to a pitch event and I would watch these people pitch. And I think they were the most amazing things ever. I would never stand up. I would never be part of it because I had no idea what to do. But I just was asking myself the question. This is 7 to 10 years before I started Feetz, which is why it's not like a magic moment. And then I found out so then I went to a women's event, and then I went to small business SBA loan weekend thing in San Francisco where it's like, come and see startups and how people do startups. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what you would even do. And I went to that conference and I listened to it and I actually heard Tim Ferriss speak. This was in his early days and he just published the 4-Hour Workweek. And then I immediately went and bought the book and I was like, I want to be that. But I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how to do it. But I was going to these things, once a month, once every other month. So this little seedling behind me of saying, I don't really know what it is I want to do. I don't have an idea. I don't think I'm good enough, or maybe I am, but I'm going to go and learn the tools. And I'm going to learn where I would go and what I would do if and when I am ready. And those were the things that I did, even though when I am in that corporate middle management job, in my spare time, that's what I did.
Well, that's pretty cool.
It's
called the meetup groups?
Yeah, meetup groups, and especially in Silicon Valley. I was there all the time. And everybody had a story about, like, you know, then Google went public and everybody was like, oh, are you going to buy it? And I'm like, well, it's projected to be $80. So no, I'm not going to buy it. And then suddenly it was $500. And we're like, what the, you know, like, I wish I'd bought it. And so all these people around you were having these conversations about the successes of these companies. And typically, obviously, from a financial perspective or a user perspective. And I also was intrigued by all the new products. So remember, I was an actuary, and I would be like, but I want to meet these people. I want to know why this is different. I was intrigued by, well, what is Twitter? Well, it's this thing where you just like write stuff. And I'm like, I have no idea why I would do that. Like, really, like a lot of people ask that. But I said, okay, I'll get an account and I'll just like try it. And so I was willing to like try all these new things that were going on in Silicon Valley, like 2004, 2005, right? All these things. And I was in the middle of Silicon Valley where all these things were popping up. And so I just tried them. And so that gave you a sense of like an environment or a community around you, like urging you or building a drumbeat behind you saying like, the world is changing. Are you going to be part of it? Or the world is changing. What are you going to be doing? And that built up over time. I did it from the internal world, though, because I was scared. So that's why I became innovation catalyst into it. So, you know, remember I said, okay, why don't we just do Twitter for TurboTax? And then I was like, I was in finance. And I said, you know what? I think I'm the youngest person here by like 10 years in finance. And they were like, well, you have to have an MBA and 10 years of experience to be in finance. And I said, I don't think that's true because a lot of this is general ledger entry work. I think you're fine with just somebody who's just come out of college. And they said, no. And I bugged them enough to say, well, can I just start like a rotational program and hire like 3 people from college? And I bugged them enough until they said, okay, Lucy, if it'll shut you up, then you can do it. And so I then started this like university rotational development program. And everyone that came to me and said no, we had 1,000 people apply for like 3 positions from amazing schools. And then I brought them in and I said, like, I'm going to kind of train them and educate them. And I had no idea how to do management. I didn't know anything about that kind of things. I just like give them a chance because these people are going to think differently. They already are used to Google. They think that's normal. So what would they do in this world of finance? And so they would then go work in purchasing, and then they would go and work in accounting and other things. And then they would do something, and the team would go, well, that's actually a good idea. And the momentum grew. So I did the Twitter attack. I then did like just hire 3 people in finance. And then I moved over to customer service and I said, let's do text analytics and do this. And so like I would keep doing it inside of the company while the environment around me and the culture was saying, Google's happening, Facebook's happening, Yahoo's happening, Yelp's happening. What are you doing? Are you part of this world or are you not? And I was practicing inside of a corporate company. Before
you were looking forward, a lot of people, some people just, they want to stay right where they are. I run into this a lot when I consult with CEOs about why they should change their company. They go, I don't want to change my company. I like the way it is right now. Well, you know what, pal? It ain't going to be that in 10 years, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And, you know, psychologists will say all sorts of same things. Like, how much is it nature versus nurture? How much is it like ingrained in you the second you are born versus it's the environment you grew up in? My first 10, 15 years of my life, like my mom died when I was 2, so I didn't have a mom. My dad was like a bit of a wild child, and I lived through 30 foster homes before I was 10 years old. And so like I would never lived in a normal environment. I didn't know that, right? Because to me, this was normal. I was like, oh yeah, I live with a Buddhist monk. And then 3 weeks later, I'm living with like a black preacher. And then 3 weeks later, I'm living with a teacher. And then 3 weeks later, I'm just living with a guy who owns a sandwich shop. I'm like, it just became normal because I didn't know anything different when you're a kid. As you become an adult and you enter the corporate world and you see how people act, you're like, oh, like you do something where you go see family every weekend and you have these like Christmas events where you meet people. I'm always used to change because that's how I had to live my life. I had to adapt quickly to any environment I had. And I didn't see that as bad. I just saw that as normal. So that was foundational to me in my, formative years before 16 years old. So hence, like, how much of that is just who I am. You're right. I do look forward because I'm always expecting change because it's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's chaotic. It means that it's just part of the normal cycle of life. Do you embrace it or are you fearful of it? I'm like, no, I'd rather be part of a change because then it doesn't happen to me. I'm like helping it evolve.
Yep.
Well, it's sometimes hard to say to other CEOs.
Well, yeah,
don't have a weird childhood.
Well, middle market guys, they and boards are like shareholders are guilty of this too, because what they want a lot of them want their CEOs to tell them is everything is fine and everything is always going to be fine, and it's just not true unless you get out ahead of this stuff. And shareholders tend to think short term, and there's all kinds of reasons why people get stuck in the mud. But what I try to do is I try to change people in middle market companies that are dying that just don't know it yet.
So, like tips for them, go reach out to a startup and say, can I spend the day with you? Go to a startup conference. Of course, you're not going to do a startup, but just go and look at the energy in the room and the thoughtfulness of what they're thinking about, even if it's not in your market or industry, just to have a look at how they approach things. Yeah.
It's better if it's not in my industry. I'll give you an example. I hired a guy who used to be the chief creativity officer for the QVC network to teach everyone in my company the principles of creativity.
Nice.
How weird is that? You bring in a QVC shopping network guy to teach creativity, but I didn't want a guy out of manufacturing to do it. I wanted something way, way outside the box.
Nice. So what are you doing now? So are you actually running a manufacturing company?
Oh, yeah, sure. Miller Ingenuity. We make everything from dumb metal and plastics to high technology safety systems built along neural networks. So we've got the whole spectrum covered, and we moved into the high-tech space from the dumb metal and low technology space 4 or 5 years ago. So that's been quite a metamorphosis, if you will. And we're all.
What made you suddenly want to change it?
Well, it was clear to me that going forward, as our patents were expiring and looking at the how the world is changing. I mean, I tell people your competition is not in the Chinese. Your competition is with robots and artificial intelligence. So you better start thinking of how you're going to deal with that in the future. And I could see where my company was going to be in 10 or 15 years if I didn't move it into the high-tech space. Now, that having said that and understanding that, I had a devil of a time convincing the board and the shareholders to do that because they want everything to just be the way it's always been.
But you did it. Or, and it's always evolving.
That's a good point. It always is. I mean, just when I think I got it figured out, I don't have it figured out. It's another piece that I didn't anticipate.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be wonderful to learn more from you about that balance of, because you obviously then would have to sink money in and not get profits for a while, and it's always hard as a company, like you said, with shareholders.
Oh yeah, they they're happy as a clam as long as you don't cut their dividends. You cut into their dividends, they go what? No, wait. But either the dividends get cut into by me, or they get cut into by the market. Take your pick.
Yeah, that's true.
One or the other.
Thank you very much for your time, Steve.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate your time, Lucy. I wish you the best of luck, and if there's anything I can ever do to help you, give me a call.
You've been listening to Transform, Ignite, Disrupt. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit StephenLBlue.com.